Some stories echo across the country because they strike a nerve, not just in politics or law, but deep inside the emotional lives of women who've been silenced, punished, or made to feel unsafe for simply holding a belief, which is actually a fact. And this is one of these stories, the story of Sandie Peggie, a nurse who stood up for women's boundaries and paid the price. Sandie Peggie worked as a nurse for over 30 years at NHS Fife. She was a dedicated professional, respected by colleagues, and known for speaking up when something felt wrong. And in October 2023, that's exactly what she did. She raised a concern about a male colleague, Dr. Beth Upton, a transgender identifying clinician who was being allowed access to the female changing rooms. Sandie Peggie believed that women and girls should have access to single-sex spaces, especially in environments as sensitive as healthcare. But instead of her concerns being addressed, Sandie herself became the subject of an investigation. Her belief, that's also a fact, that sex is real, immutable, and should matter when it comes to things like changing rooms was treated not as protected speech but as misconduct, and she was suspended in January 2024. And this also followed when she didn't want to get undressed in the same changing room. Imagine speaking up for women's privacy, quoting safeguarding principles that have existed for decades and been suspended for it. She filed a grievance, then she filed a tribunal, and what followed was an exhausting, high-profile legal battle. The tribunal, Peggie versus NHS Fife, became a test case in Scotland for how far an employer can go in punishing someone for their belief in biological sex, which is also a fact. Sandie asked to refer to Dr. Upton as he during the proceedings because that aligned with the facts, and the judge agreed. In January 2025, it was ruled that compelling her to use female pronouns would interfere with her freedom of belief under the Equality Act. But none of that was easy. What do you do when your workplace turns on you? When colleagues are silent and even some of them are hostile? When the media's watching? And when you're standing up for women and it feels like no one's standing up for you? And that's what we don't always talk about, the emotional impact, the shame, the isolation, the trauma of being cast out for not doing wrong, but just for refusing to lie. And this is why my counselling service exists for women like Sandie, women who are gender critical, not hateful, not extreme, just honest. Women who are afraid to speak at work, afraid to name what they see. Women whose careers have been threatened, whose families don't understand, whose communities have turned cold. At kellyoliverdougall.co.uk, we support women who are navigating the emotional toll of standing by their convictions. We understand what it's like when being truthful feels dangerous, and we hold space for your story without judgment, because no woman should have to endure what Sandie went through. Well, not at all, but especially not alone. In July 2025, NHS Fife cleared Sandie of all gross misconduct allegations, but it took over a year of being suspended, a year of public scrutiny, and a year of defending our own sanity. Not every woman can survive that kind of pressure, and not every woman should have to. Sandie's case is ongoing, but her courage has already lit a path for others. Her story isn't just about law, it's about what happens to women when they tell the truth in a system that punishes them for it, and that's where the healing begins. If you've been ostracised for your views, if you've lost friends, jobs, or opportunities, if you've been called a bigot for stating a biological fact, we're here. If your nervous system's shot, your confidence gone, your voice cracked with self-doubt, we get it and we're ready to support you. There's more women like Sandie Peggie than you think. Maybe you're one of them. You're not hysterical and you're not alone. And you don't have to go through this without support.